On today's History of Politics, we're going to talk about another of the post Civil War amendments, the 15th Amendment. And this amendment deals with the right to vote. Basically, what the writing of the Constitution says is that anyone in the United States, a United States citizen, uh, the United States cannot abridge or stop their right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous servitude, meaning slaves. In other words, the slaves can vote. If you are a citizen of the United States, you have the right to vote. If you're a former slave, because the former slaves did not have that right, a slave could vote. Now, we're going to get into the Dred Scott decision later, but the bottom line is that even former slaves at that point could vote. This is part of what the Civil War was about because they were outnumbered. And this was also what brought about the Electoral College, because the southern states that promoted slavery were underrepresented. Because even though the people were there, slaves couldn't be counted as voters. So that's why they instituted the Electoral College and awarded X amount of votes to X amount of states to try to offset that thing. But the fact of the matter is that if you don't give the slaves the right to have a say-so because they were considered not people, they kind of lose in that. So here, after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment says that a citizen, a U.S. citizen, has the right to vote. And the U.S. nor any state can deny that right to vote. So here's what that basically means. If you were born here to American parents, you're a U.S. citizen, you have the right to vote. If your parents were from a foreign country, but you were born here, you have a right to vote via birthright citizenship. If your family are brought here under chain migration, you have a right to vote. It's that simple. This is the same law that gave Fred Trump the right to vote, Mary Trump the right to vote, Donald and all his siblings the right to vote, 2 of his wives the right to vote, and 4 of his 5 children the right to vote. Birthright citizenship. They were allowed to vote. The second part of the amendment says that Congress has the power to enforce that through appropriate legislation. Just like the 14th and the 13th Amendments, they all say the same thing. That's something that's going to be reinforced time and time again, is that Congress does have the power to enforce that right. They can draw up additional legislation, even though it would be redundant. But if need be, like if a state wants to challenge it, Congress can go ahead and force that state to acknowledge the Constitution. In essence. So if you're born here, if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're naturalized here, you have the right to vote. Now, the interesting part about that is inmates, prison inmates, because they suffer what's called civil death. An inmate in prison cannot vote. If you're out on parole or probation, you cannot vote in most states. In Florida, for example, once you've been discharged from parole, if your fines aren't paid up, you still cannot vote. And sometimes it's actually not made clear to these ex-offenders. I recall a case in Texas back after the first Trump election in 2016, where a Trump supporter voted for Trump twice and got probation. But a woman who had been discharged from prison but was on parole and was never told that she couldn't vote. She voted against Trump, and they put her back in jail for 5 years. It is a very serious charge, but it needs to be made clear to folks leaving prison that they don't have the right to vote until they're out of custody. However, the thing is that that's a law that came about with the states, and it's not outlined in the Constitution. I guess this was to avoid the expense of having to put voting machines in prisons, more than likely. And it kind of troubles me because the bulk of inmates in prison are minorities, people of color. Voting is a very important thing. And I need to ask those who don't believe in voting, riddle me this. Why is it that political parties spend so much money to get your vote? Clearly, it's important. It has to be important, even though Donald Trump is trying his damnedest to end elections as we know them. But still, the right to vote is sacred. It's your voice, your say. The old saying is, how did that go? Representation, with taxation without representation. You pay taxes, you should vote. You have that right. Exercise it. You need to have a say in what goes on. Don't think that if just because it happened in Washington, D.C., it's not going to trickle down to you, because it does. Everything they do comes to you. So you need to vote and have your say in the matter. People fought and died for you to have that right to vote. Because believe me, in England in that time, they didn't have the right to vote. Your leaders were based on family ties. They weren't elected. But the Constitution here, via the 15th Amendment, allows it. And the point about the 15th Amendment in particular is, like I said, it's a post-Civil War amendment. And what it did was basically it gave the slaves a chance to have their voice heard. They were freed men, and freed men have a right to have their say. If you don't go and vote, you are disrespecting those, some of them maybe even have been your own family members, your ancestors. You're disrespecting the right that they fought so hard to get. That's the 15th Amendment, the right to vote. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.